July 30th, 2025, a date that will be remembered as a turning point in North American relations. On this day, the world witnessed a dramatic collapse of trade talks between two of the largest economies in the world, the United States and Canada. The negotiations, which had been ongoing for months, were expected to reach a resolution. However, they ended in a dramatic fashion, leaving both nations at a crossroads. The collapse of these talks has sent shockwaves through the global economy. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, visibly frustrated, stormed out of a high-stakes meeting in Washington. This came after President Trump made an unexpected demand for Canada to accept a trade deal heavily favoring U.S. interests. The tension in the room was palpable as security details quickly moved to escort officials out. This standoff is not merely a regional issue, it represents a pivotal test for the global order. The implications of this breakdown extend far beyond North America, affecting international trade dynamics and diplomatic relations worldwide. The economies of the U.S. and Canada are deeply intertwined, with billions of dollars in trade crossing their borders daily. Any disruption in this relationship could have catastrophic effects, potentially triggering a global recession. The stakes are incredibly high as businesses and workers on both sides of the border brace for impact. Allies around the world are closely monitoring the situation, questioning the stability of their own partnerships with the United States. America's new protectionist stance has left many wondering if any alliance is truly secure. The clash between Prime Minister Carney's pragmatic approach and President Trump's hardline tactics has escalated into a full-blown crisis. This confrontation has far-reaching implications not just for North America but for the entire global community. The livelihoods of millions are now at risk. Jobs, prices, and economic stability hang in the balance as families and businesses anxiously await the outcome of this standoff. Economists are closely analyzing the potential fallout, while ordinary citizens watch the news with growing concern. As the world holds its breath, the next chapter in North American relations is about to unfold. The decisions made in the coming days will shape the future of international trade and diplomacy. The stakes have never been higher, and the world watches with bated breath, hoping for a resolution that will restore stability and cooperation. To truly understand the complexities of today's economic crisis, we must delve into the intricacies of recent U.S. trade policy. The U.S. has been aggressively reshaping its trade relationships, focusing on securing advantageous terms. Over the past 18 months, the Trump administration has strategically maneuvered the EU and Japan into accepting restrictive trade deals. These agreements imposed 15% tariffs and included demands for increased investment in U.S. manufacturing sectors, a move designed to bolster domestic industries. These perceived victories not only emboldened Washington but also set a precedent, a template that the administration expected other nations, particularly Canada, to follow without much resistance. The White House viewed Canada as the final and perhaps the easiest domino to fall in its strategic plan. The expectation was that Canada would acquiesce to similar terms, given the close economic ties and geographical proximity. However, this assumption underestimated Canada's resolve. The Canadian government, backed by a strong public sentiment, stood firm against the pressure, determined to protect its own economic interests and sovereignty. The U.S. had used its leverage to set a new global standard, but Ottawa wasn't just defending its own interests, it was challenging a new American doctrine. This resistance highlighted a significant shift in global trade dynamics, where smaller nations began to push back against larger powers. The deals with Europe and Japan weren't just background noise, they were the opening acts in a larger geopolitical play. These agreements set the stage for a new era of trade negotiations where the balance of power was being tested. Now, Canada finds itself at the center of this global stage, with the world watching closely to see if it will break the pattern established by the U.S. with its previous deals. The outcome of these negotiations could redefine international trade norms. The pressure on Canada is immense, but the stakes are even higher. The decisions made in these negotiations will have far-reaching implications, not just for Canada and the U.S., but for global trade as a whole. This is the climactic scene in a global drama where the future of international trade hangs in the balance and the world waits with bated breath to see how this chapter will unfold. Ottawa insists its situation is unique. Canada and the U.S. share deeply integrated supply chains, unlike the EU or Japan, where trade is mostly finished goods. The CUSMA agreement already ensures most goods flow tariff-free. Imposing a blanket 15% tariff would shatter North American production and hurt both economies. Canada is also a critical supplier of energy and resources to the U.S., creating mutual dependence. Tariffs would raise costs for both sides, making a trade war especially damaging. Canadian officials argue the U.S. approach is misguided for such a tightly linked economy. This fundamental disagreement has brought talks to a dangerous impasse. The ongoing dispute between the United States and Canada over steel and aluminum tariffs has become a defining issue in North American trade relations. At the heart of the conflict are U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, which were imposed under the controversial claim of protecting national security. This justification has been widely debated, as many experts argue that Canada, a close ally, poses no real threat to American security. The tariffs have not only strained economic ties but have also ignited political tensions on both sides of the border. From Canada's perspective, these tariffs are a clear violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. Canadian officials and business leaders have repeatedly called for the removal of these barriers, arguing that they undermine the trust and cooperation that CUSMA was meant to foster. Protests and heated debates have erupted across Canada, with many citizens feeling unfairly targeted by their largest trading partner. However, the situation is complicated by the presence of loopholes within CUSMA itself. These legal gray areas allow the United States to justify its actions, claiming that national security exemptions give them the right to impose such tariffs. This has created a paradox. While CUSMA was designed to promote free trade and resolve disputes, its own provisions are now being used to perpetuate conflict. In a surprising twist, the U.S. has now put forward a new demand. Canada must accept a sweeping 15% tariff on all goods in exchange for lifting the steel and aluminum tariffs. This proposal has shocked Canadian negotiators, who see it as an unreasonable escalation that would harm a wide range of industries beyond just steel and aluminum. For Ottawa, this is an impossible trade-off. Agreeing to such terms would mean solving one problem only to create a much larger one, potentially crippling Canadian exports and damaging the broader economy. The frustration among Canadian officials is palpable as they struggle to find a solution that protects their national interests without sacrificing economic stability. Meanwhile, the White House is ramping up the pressure, using threats and looming deadlines to try to force Canada's hand. American officials have made it clear that time is running out and that failure to comply could result in even harsher measures. Despite these tactics, Canada believes that CUSMA still gives it leverage. Canadian negotiators are determined to stand firm, insisting that the agreement's dispute resolution mechanisms and its emphasis on fair trade can be used to push back against U.S. demands. The situation reached a boiling point today, as Canadian diplomats staged a dramatic walkout from the latest round of talks. This bold move signals that patience has finally run out, and that Canada is no longer willing to accept what it sees as bullying tactics. The escalating fight over steel and aluminum now threatens to spill over into the entire trade relationship between the two countries. With billions of dollars in goods crossing the border every day, the stakes are enormous, not just for businesses, but for workers and consumers on both sides. As the world watches closely, the outcome of this dispute could reshape the future of North American trade. The stakes have never been higher, and the next moves by both governments will determine whether cooperation or conflict defines the years ahead. Carney's walkout was political theater and a calculated risk. It signaled Canada won't be bullied. Domestically, Carney's defiance is likely to boost his popularity, but if the U.S. retaliates, he risks being blamed for a trade war. Internationally, Canada's stand could inspire others or serve as a warning. Carney is betting that deep economic integration will deter both sides from disaster. He's challenging the White House to consider the real-world costs. The conflict is now at its peak. Will this gamble force a breakthrough or trigger a breakdown? Markets in Toronto and New York plunged, the Canadian dollar tumbled, supply chains are at risk. Tariffs could halt cross-border production, raise prices, and kill jobs. In Canada, Carney may see a surge of support, but prolonged pain could fracture unity. In the U.S., Trump's base cheers, but industries reliant on Canadian trade are alarmed. Communities like Windsor and Detroit, economically intertwined, face layoffs and uncertainty. The human cost is real: shuttered businesses, lost jobs, and anxiety. Globally, allies are rattled by America's treatment of its closest neighbor. Trust in Western alliances is eroding. Some may seek new partnerships, even with rivals like China. This isn't just a North American crisis, it's a global shockwave. The consequences are unpredictable. After the walkout, experts say Carney's move was risky but necessary. Trade lawyer Jonathan O'Hara calls the U.S. demand economic suicide. The consensus: Canada should hold firm, use CUSMA as a shield, and avoid rash retaliation. The strategy: legal challenges, diplomatic outreach, and appealing directly to U.S. business and political leaders. Patience is key. Let economic pain in the U.S. build pressure for a resolution. Dr. Emily Vance advises against rushing back to the table for a bad deal. Canada must project strength while quietly building a coalition of allies within the U.S. The path ahead is tough, but it's the only way to protect Canada's interests. The crisis won't end quickly. Success depends on resolve and smart diplomacy. The White House is expected to set a new deadline for Canada to accept its terms, or face harsher penalties. This deadline diplomacy is meant to create panic and force a quick surrender, but CUSMA gives Canada some insulation. Most trade continues, buying time. Carney can argue there's no need to rush into a bad deal. Canada may call the U.S. bluff, betting Washington won't risk mutual economic harm. The coming days will test nerves on both sides. American businesses hurt by the standoff will add pressure for compromise. The battle is now one of political will. As the shock fades, the world looks for signs of de-escalation. Watch the rhetoric. Will leaders double down or seek compromise? American industry and Congress could become powerful voices for resolution. Back-channel diplomacy may already be underway, even if public talks have collapsed. Real progress may come quietly, not from high-profile summits. For citizens and investors, expect volatility, but don't panic. The Canada-US relationship has survived storms before. Leaders must prioritize calm, strategic thinking over anger. Canada must hold firm but seek pragmatic compromise. The world is watching, hoping reason prevails over rhetoric.